reality? Is what we see, hear, or are being told the truth? Or just one version of the reality? Some people make an art of writing fiction that is as believable as reality. You might think it's the truth, and maybe it is the truth. Wisdom's Maw is a book by Todd Fahey, with whom we are talking, and it is about the LSD experiences of the 60s, basically. And what is your main thesis?
Main thesis is that the CIA might well have created, unknowingly or knowingly, the 60s counterculture in the United States through its importation of LSD and the use of it on college students in the 1960s, Ken Kesey foremost.
Are you implying that LSD was planted in that sense by some government agency in order to do what?
The CIA has been fairly open since the declassification of the MK Ultra experiments in its admission that it sought at one point in time the, quote, total control over human behavior, and chiefly through the use of LSD. It didn't work. In fact, I think it backfired horribly on them, which is kind of the cosmic joke on the CIA. But there were enough hardcore company agents interested in the psychedelic phenomenon that they got the wild notion that they would begin using it on their own agents and also on 60s college students, really just to see what happened.
Let's go back a little bit. LSD came up in the late 50s. It was actually invented in 1944 by Albert Hofmann.
Yes.
On Bicycle Day, 14th of April. And until the late 50s, it was used by a few doctors here and there, Stan Grof. And then a few professors at Harvard picked up the subject and started doing research, notably Leary and Ram Dass.
Yeah.
And they did experiments. Some of them were very encouraging about using LSD to get people off other drugs, like alcohol.
Yeah.
But what then happened was that Leary started to preach this belief, like, what was it, drop out?
Tune in, turn on, drop out.
And he was preaching that LSD was the thing for the whole nation. And for a few years, or actually a short time, it happened, and I think 1962 or 63, it was a legal drug, and millions of college students took it.
Yeah.
That became the counterculture. That peaked out in 69, like with the Vietnam War and riots and stuff all in Europe.
Altamont, yeah.
Okay, now your theory, it's a book, it's fiction.
It's fiction, yeah.
But you have some reason to believe that what you claim is true or not true?
I burrowed deeply into the LSD experience personally in 1988 and came out of it in 1994 and really lived in LSD as an alternate reality. And in the process of that heavy usage of LSD, I was given a couple nonfiction books, Acid Dreams, published by Grove Press in '85, and Storming Heaven, published by Harper Perennial in '87 by Jay Stevens. And was just utterly fascinated, and I was getting a master's degree in creative writing at University of Southern California and needed to come up with a thing to write for my thesis.
And you wrote this. You wrote this, Wisdom's Maw.
I wrote Wisdom's Maw.
Which is basically says, suppose it could have happened that the CIA was behind all of this. What you're implying then is that people like Leary and Casey and all those people were on the take, that they were directly or indirectly paid or helped by the CIA to propagate this LSD use.
I'm kind of going to hold my tongue on Professor Leary. I knew him. I interviewed him twice. I had dinner with him in '92. There's a lot of speculation that he may or may not have been involved with the CIA. There is a lot of speculation.
There's many people that were involved in the early in the early LSD experiments that later started institutes or
Yeah,
and in some way or another they cooperated with the government.
sure.
Is that enough to say that they were part of a similar or a scheme as what you're suggesting?
It may be enough. The particular protagonist in this, there's two protagonists, two main characters in this story. One being a character named Franklin Moore, who is my fictionalization of Ken Kesey, and the other being Al Hubbard, the mysterious Captain Trips. Um,
The guy who actually in San Francisco lived in his house and he was the one who distributed millions and millions of trips in those early years.
yeah, he turned on Aldous Huxley for the first time when Huxley wrote the book Heaven and Hell, and is widely known to have been an agent of some stripe. I burrowed as close to Al Hubbard as I think any journalist has ever gotten for a long investigative article for High Times magazine in 1991 after reading Acid Dreams and Storming Heaven, and this shadowy
Yeah, but they were all
Kentucky-
shadowy figures.
Yeah.
They were on one hand paid by universities, governments. They were used. The typical thing about Leary is that he became good friends and actually performed with the guy that put him in jail and
G. Gordon Liddy.
very strange things. At the moment we have in the electronic world, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which on one hand it's known that John Barlow, well, consults for the CIA, telling them stuff about what hackers do and stuff like that. Yeah, who's paying whom and who is organizing what? It seems that, you know, in the tradition, this is a bit of in the tradition of Robert Anton Wilson, isn't it? You are make-believe, you're changing our view of history.
It's revisionist history, sure.
Yes, in Europe we have people like, who wrote Foucault's Pendulum, Umberto Eco, who does a similar thing.
Yeah.
But here you have something, but you're actually trying to be a bit nasty in the tradition of what journalists in America did that?
Hunter S. Thompson.
Yes.
Yeah, I've got another persona that I put on, the Fear and Loathing persona. I'm over here to do an article for Smoke magazine in New York, Fear and Loathing in Amsterdam, and yeah, I'm paid to be the bad boy of American
Of the
letters, I
psychedelic
guess.
press,
Yeah.
Just tell me, how is that doing, so the psychedelic press? In Europe, there have been a few incidents where governments have clamped down on writers who just wrote books about the subject of growing marijuana or using drugs or whatever, and they said, you know, they put them in jail and they forbid the book. Is it the same in the States?
High Times magazine was hassled a couple of years ago by the DEA. I think they got their customer lists and know they caused them a lot of problems, and a lot of people think now that High Times might be a snitch agency for the DEA. I don't quite believe that. I'm good friends with Steve Hager and John Holmstrom, editors of
But it's
High
funny
Times.
that the American government always seems to be, you know, playing both sides at the same time. That they are against drugs, and then on the other hand they're involved in the trade and on a big scale.
The crack situation supposedly being sold by CIA agents to
yes.
the blacks in
And the
Bronx.
blacks are rioting now because they feel that they've
They
been
were
maneuvered.
used, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the same thing happened in Holland, where the police, for sort of, you know, the law for some reason got involved in importing huge amounts of drugs, saying this is the way to catch the big guys, but they imported more than anybody ever could smoke or take or whatever. It became ridiculous involvement, criminal involvement of the government. This was a big scandal and not satisfactorily solved. Most of the major district attorneys and people like that are still in office. I mean, it's a weird situation.
Yeah.
But coming back to your book, I see it was reviewed by Are You Serious? Ken Goffman, the founding editor of Mondo 2000.
The trickster prankster, yeah.
Yes, he is the Ken Casey of our days, isn't he?
He is, yep.
Yeah.
Or the wavy gravy. I don't
Yeah,
know which.
yeah, wavy gravy too. Now tell me a little bit about Ken Casey in this respect, because he's your protagonist.
Yeah, Ken Kesey has been a hero of mine ever since I
He
read
wrote books like
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Dharma Bums.
No, that was Jack Kerouac.
That was Jack Kerouac.
Who's also in the book.
Yeah, yes. Well, those were the people in the
Yeah.
50s, 60s
The whole
that
cast
wrote
of
the stuff.
characters are in this
Yes.
book. Aldous Huxley, Hunter Thompson, Neil Cassidy, they're all in Wisdom's Maw. And this book circulated around the New York publishing houses.
Who's your agent?
From 1990 to 1995, unsuccessfully. My agent at that time was a man named Bill Stanky, and I also had an agent named Harold Schmidt.
Because they say now that agents are the most important people in the book business.
They couldn't sell this book. They couldn't put this book through. They couldn't push it over the hump. And finally, I got word from the horse's mouth by an Associated Press journalist, Mitchell Landsberg, from Jim Fitzgerald, senior acquisitions editor at St. Martin's Press, and he said, "We knew about this book. I frankly liked this book. I wanted to take this book, but we couldn't touch this book with a 10-foot pole."
Political thing, because well, you don't make any revelation, so you don't do that, but you're implying that. Yeah. Now there is a story, a long-standing story, that in fact LSD was distributed by the agencies not so much to start a revolution, but to control the revolution. They saw it was coming.
That's what this
is. Yeah, they saw it coming and said, this thing gets out of hand if we don't do something. This war that we are having on our hands is getting too big. We will have opposition. Let's give the crazy kids a little square, place to play with. Here we have a nice drug.
Yep.
Let them play with it. And in their view, probably, I mean, you could say it saved a lot of lives, because if all those people actually would have taken up guns and started a civil war, you would have had different situations.
Brilliant.
Yeah. What is your feeling that the CIA thinks about this book?
Wow. I can only imagine. It's only been out for 3 months. I self-published this book because...
So Far Gone Books is you?
Is my...
This was one book that you wrote. You have plans for other books?
Yeah, I've got a collection of short stories that's called Dog Shit Park and Other Atrocities, in which his very heavy black humor in the vein of Terry Southern and William Burroughs, that type of real bent, grotesque black humor. I'm self-publishing that as well in April. And then at the end of this year,
It's quite a thing to do. Pikal was self-published. Quite a few authors now say, "Hey, come on, let's put the $5,000 or $10,000 down and have it at least published and take it into the public eye," because the big guys don't dare do it. Yeah. But isn't there, like, your printer actually would have said, I won't touch this?
One did in Salt Lake City. Got the manuscript, got the cover art, and
said
sniffed around and said we can't do it, and set me back 4 weeks.
Okay. Todd, you're in Amsterdam now. How you like Amsterdam? You can find acid, I understand, but for the rest, you can find...
I found acid, but only for a trip, not in any quantities. Besides the drugs, it's just a sophisticated, complex, beautiful, architecturally wonderful, spiritually, buoyant city. I just love it. This is really...
Well, I hope you have a good time, and your book is well received. This was Todd Brandon Fahey.
Fahey, yes.
And his book is Wisdom's More. You're talking about people that I know, because I was involved in Mondo 2000. I know all the people, all the names, all the stuff. But I'm probably one of the very few people here who know who what you're talking about? Do you think internationally it will have an appeal?
I've got a Dutch translator who's willing to translate it, depending on how it plays in the first few months here, and also how it does in America. So I would be more than happy and thrilled to have it translated into Dutch.
Yeah, in other languages.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Huh.
You're not afraid that then this is your last trip abroad and that it will
Oh no.
revoke your
Oh, I hope not. I would fancy myself having a tiny apartment here in Amsterdam.
Now, this was one book that you wrote. You have plans for other books?
Yeah, I've got a collection of short stories that's called Dog Shit Park and Other Atrocities, in which his very heavy black humor in the vein of Terry Southern and William Burroughs, that type of real bent, grotesque black humor. I'm self-publishing that as well in April, and then at the end of this year,
It's quite a thing to do. Pikal was self-published. Quite a few authors now say, "Hey, come on, let's put the $5,000 or $10,000 down and have it at least published and take it into the public eye, because the big guys don't dare do it." Yeah. But isn't there like your printer actually would have said, I won't touch this?
One did in Salt Lake City. Got the manuscript, got the cover art, and
That's it.
sniffed around and said we can't do it, and set me back 4 weeks.
Okay. Todd, you're in Amsterdam now. How you like Amsterdam?
Oh,
You can find acid, I understand, but for the rest, you can find.
I found acid, but only for a trip, not in any quantities. Besides the drugs, it's just a sophisticated, complex, beautiful, architecturally wonderful, spiritually, buoyant city. I just love it. This is really.
Well, I hope you have a good time and your book is well received. This was Todd Fahey,
Fahey, yes.
and his book is Wisdom's More